Now mai haere mai, tina koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou katoa. Welcome to our spring panel, psychology spring panel on fresh views on perspectives on well-being. It's a pleasure to present this to you from the School of Psychology, Te Kura Hinengaro, here from Te Herenga Waka, where we are. I'm just going to do quick housekeeping and then hand over very quickly because you want to really hear from our amazing panel. Bathrooms are out the door and then behind this block that you see when you walk outside of the door, left and right. In case of in emergency, including earthquakes, we all head out these doors or the back doors and then go down out towards the old government building in this area. And without more of this, I meant to say that we also record this, just so you know, we record the session for some people who could not make it. And when the room get to have the people in the room have if you have registered, you can get the link and you can rewatch it later as well. So I would like to introduce Dr. Georgia Carson, who is working at the Malaghan Institute. And we have the amazing luck to have her as a moderator of this evening because she is actually not a psychologist. And I think that's a good thing because she has like a little bit of this outside view and is not going to tempt to fall into all this jargon that we tend to sometimes do. And so it's a great pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Ngā mihi Hedwig. So as Hedwig said, I'm not a psychologist. I have a doctorate in cancer, metabolism, genetics, and lots of molecular stuff, but I know very, very little about psychology. So my job is Tautotoro Māori Engagement Advisor at the Malaghan Institute of Medical Research up at the Kelburn campus. And so we do immunology and biomedical research, so clinical trials and that sort of thing. But it's not about me. So tonight we have very, very esteemed, and I'm being told not to say psychologists because I made the mistake of conflating people that work in the School of Psychology with psychologists, but they are very esteemed panelists. And so instead of reading out their bios, instead of reading out their bios, which you will probably already have, and in some cases you already know them, I will instead ask them to talk a little bit more about their research and especially how this idea of well-being interacts with their research. So first of all, because you're closest to me, Dr. Chris Nielsen.
Sure. I tried to hand the mic along to Ellie, but she refused to accept it. Kia ora koutou. My name's Chris. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working the last couple of years mainly with ACC and working in a concussion recovery space, a little bit of sexual trauma and general mental health. And then this year I've been lucky enough to join the staff in the School of Psychology to try to come back to some of my PhD research, which was, I'm really interested in, I guess, the concept of mental disorder. And I use the word concept in the sense of how do individuals think about mental disorder? What do they take it to be? And how does that vary across people? And can we maybe think of some ways of thinking about this thing we call mental disorder, or things we call mental disorder, maybe more advantageous than others? And that's probably enough to give you a sense of what I'm interested in. Yeah.
Kia ora. Hand over to
Ellie.
Dr. Ellie Rukuwai. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ko Ellie tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Te Ati Haunui a Paparangi, Ngā Rauru, Ngāti Apa ki te Rātoa, me Ngāti Tūwhare Toa. Kia ora, I'm Ellie. I whakapapa Māori, and I do research that looks at rangatahi Māori a lot and kind of more in a clinical space. I am still in the clinical psychology program, so I'm studying to become like Chris. yeah, but my PhD looked at perfectionism, so setting like really high standards for ourselves that aren't always realistic, and how rangatahi Māori, so Māori adolescents, experienced that and how that was different to our kind of more general or Western understanding of perfectionism. I also do a bit of non-suicidal self-injury research, so self-harm, things like cutting. Again, quite related to Māori, but also more generally as well. And then the last thing that I'm really interested in at the moment is kind of Māori student experiences in Western institutions versus Māori medium education. Yeah, that's me.
Kia ora. Okay. And Dr. Matt Hammond, over to you.
Kia ora. My name's Matt. I study relationships. I study relationships from people hooking up to people breaking up and all the bits in between hooking up and breaking up. So my research intersects with well-being all the way through. I mean, falling in love tends to be one of the peak experiences people report having in their entire lives. It tends to be associated with a heap of good feelings and a heap of really terrifying, anxious, bad feelings. The same as breaking up. Easier to think about the bad feelings of breaking up, but there's a lot of good feelings that go along with breaking up too sometimes. And the bits in between often involve supporting one another, and interpersonal support and the support that people give one another is one of the fundamental things that we need for our well-being, behind air and food, but probably third, is my guess. Yes.
Kia ora. Okay. No, this is very interesting, and I'm looking forward to digging into this more with you folks. So I know it's a little bit of a cliche to kind of start with definitions and et cetera, but I wondered if you folks could tell me what your conception of well-being, like what is your definition if people ask you? Because I think rather than naively, I've got more of a health bias. And so I think of well-being as like not got cancer, not got diabetes, and maybe the mental health stuff, I'm like, oh, happy? I have a very simplistic idea of it. So maybe you could give us a little bit more nuance in how, especially maybe how the public understanding of well-being might differ to you as experts, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, what a big, gigantic, cool question that is. I guess part of what we're going to get into later on is also how this can differ across people and across the world. So I'll start with the easier bit, which is what do I do in my research? How do I study well-being? If you were to come into the lab and report your well-being, what would we be doing? I would be asking you questions and getting you to answer them, and you would tell me. In my research, we trust people to have the best idea of whether they're well or not. Partly that's an advantage of not being in a super clinical space where I don't need to worry too much about people being so detached from what's going on in their bodies and minds. But for the most part, for the people I interact with, I ask them questions. And if they say they're well, I go, that person's doing well. And if they say they're not at all well, then I'm concerned. And for the most part, our research bears that out to be really accurate, because the people who say they aren't well tend to over time become more sick, become less well, report worse outcomes in their jobs and their lives. The people who say they're doing better and their relationships are doing better, the complete opposite. They tend to do better in education and the work in their lives. So yeah, easy answer from me. Probably more complicated answers coming next.
Well-being, I think it is different for everyone, kind of like what Matt said. Yeah, this is a hard question.
You can just step it.
It's okay. For me personally, I think it's not just like the medical or physical side. It's the mental side, but it's also how you're doing in your relationships with your family, with your friends. For me personally, like how connected am I to my Māoritanga? Have I been back to my marae? Do I know my language? That kind of thing it's really important for my well-being. And I find that when I do those things, I do actually feel a lot better. But I agree with what Matt said about we kind of trust that most people know what being well is for themselves. Something I like to do with my students is ask them, hey, what does wellbeing actually look like for you? And then in the lecture, I get them to talk about it. And then I put up little photos of what wellbeing is for me. So it'll be like a picture of me with my friends, my cat, that kind of thing. And it makes people think a little bit more about, oh, I didn't realize that those things kind of come into wellbeing, or that they could. And yeah, helps to broaden their kind of perspective on that a bit more. But yeah, I'm yapping now. So
I kind of have two responses to that question, and I am terribly indecisive, so I might just go with both. One is that I'm frustrated. I both and confused by exactly what, in full support of what you guys are saying in terms of the what do we mean by well-being when it seems to vary across everyone? And sometimes for me that comes from when you see the word well-being all over the place. When we were planning this evening, we were thinking like, what word do we want to use? And well-being seems like the best fit, but we hear the word so often now. I almost feel a little like, oh,
it's a bit
not
of a cliche.
It's become a bit of a cliche, but if it invites the kind of consideration that Ellie is talking about, and this question of am I well, then it's a useful conversation to have. For me, how it intersects with my research, obviously I'm interested in mental disorder, and for me that relationship, this is the second response that I have to this question, mental disorder or whatever labels we want to refer to that, significant challenges in one's mental health, is sort of a smaller defined concept. And outside of that, well-being, problems in well-being probably becomes an even bigger concept. And then well-being, and each step we take out, it seems to become a bit blurrier almost and a bit harder to define. But I think probably the best answer that I have heard, one that stuck with me, was by Simon Keller in the philosophy department at Vic. He had got to get this right now, he had a tentative definition where he said well-being, one way we might define it is that it is somebody's degree or their capacity to live their version of their good life, the degree to which they feel prepared to action and carve out the life that works for them and what they want it to be, which is very blurry, which brings me back to that initial frustration. Yeah. Those are kind of where my thoughts go with that question.
Okay, because I know you in particular wanted to kind of dig into that question a little bit more about, okay, what is well-being and how does that relate to both mental health and what we are calling mental disorders? So maybe if we could talk a bit more about that, like also who gets to decide, is it that person or is it their clinician or is it their friends and whānau, and can maybe somebody that has what we maybe would call a mental disorder, can they lead a good life regardless? Or I don't know, these are just some questions I'm thinking about how exactly.
The easy questions. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm thinking of more questions that I haven't even written down.
No, they're very good questions to be asking. Again, it sort of fits that in the pictures that I've got in my head. Something like, recognized patterns of mental distress that seem similar enough across the population. Institutions like psychiatry and clinical psychology have sort of put these labels in place because the patterns, they're not perfect, but they seem roughly similar enough, and we've put a label on that. There are certainly patterns of mental health difficulty that do not fit those labels well. But outside of that tighter concept of a mental health problem, we might have this broader concept of mental health, which is used in different ways and seems to be one facet of well-being, but then not having cancer is another, right? In the physical health side of things. And so that hopefully alludes to how I sort of see the relationship between those things. But the second kind of arm of the very many questions you were discussing there is perhaps a lot more challenging. The idea of who gets to decide, I think when we're talking about something as contested and blurry as well-being, I think Matt's initial answer is probably on the money. Sometimes we've just got to ask people. There are certain particular cases where something might be getting in the way of what we might call insight. But outside of that, most of the time that the person's going to be the best measure of how well they are in this broader sense. But to recognize and label particular patterns of difficulty, like the process of diagnosis and who gets to do that, that's a more complicated question. And I don't know if we have time to dig into all of that tonight.
Answer.
Yeah, I might avoid that one.
Do any of you two have anything to add to that, Kōrero? If not, Kate, fine. No, okay, ka pai. So to talk a little bit more about mental health, and again, it's kind of like well-being, it's a bit of a buzzword. Do you have any thoughts about whether the stigma around mental health is changing? Like certainly I can think of my parents and maybe grandparents' generation, you didn't want to say anything like about being depressed or anxious, and my generation, which is very millennial and younger, they certainly, it appears that we're more open with saying, hey, actually, no, I am struggling. Is that just an impression I have, not backed up by data, or does anybody know?
I don't know about data-wise, but I think definitely with the younger generations, it is a lot less stigmatized, but I think that comes as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's amazing that people can be open about this and not feel like they're alone, because I think that's one of the harder things about the fact that mental illness was stigmatized for so long. But with things like social media, where people can share unsafe expressions of mental health, so things like on Tumblr, sharing pictures of like anorexia, purging, binging, cutting behaviors, and suicidal thoughts. If someone gets onto that side of social media, it is really hard to get off of that side because of things like algorithms, AI. So I think when people are sharing their personal experiences, I think it's amazing, and it can be really, really uplifting for those who have also experienced that. But there is a line that does get crossed. And as much as social media platforms can try to censor really unhelpful photos, there's only so much that they can do. And yeah, algorithms don't work that well to pick out every single like different word that people will use for those behaviors. So I think yes, and I hope that it continues to become less stigmatized. I would say it's definitely more so for things like anxiety, depression, self-harm even to a point, but for the more things like BPD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, I would say that they're actually still pretty stigmatized because they have been associated with really violent behavior for a really long time, which isn't always the case. In fact, it's more often than not the case. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything to add, maybe about the stigma or about the social media aspects of wellness? And
Sure. Some of my research is into social media and connection and what people would get out of it. If you're in the audience and you hear that and you go, why would you ever want to go on a website and share something like anorexia, or what do you gain out of that? The relationships person's going to say it's relationships. And one of the reasons it's so intractable and so difficult to get people out is because we need validation really deeply. We love someone saying, yeah, you're right.
it's a very human thing.
Deeply human. Yeah. See, right now you said that I'm right.
I didn't even realize
And I felt so good.
I totally planned that.
And often when we're wrong, we want someone to tell us that we're right. If you've ever gone home after an argument with someone and your partner has said, well, how come they said that? Did they maybe they picked up something that you didn't pick up. How frustrating is that, even if that's exactly what happened, right? What you want when you go to a friend or a partner.
Please,
Yeah.
I need it.
You want them to be like, no, that's the worst person I've ever heard about in the whole world.
Right, it's such an idiot.
Yeah, you want that first. And then later on, maybe once you have that validation, you can get past the thing. So validation becomes so important. And I think that's one of the double-edged swords, is that I do think stigma has gone down. And I think part of that is the opportunity to find sources of validation online, because you can now look up anything you want to validate about anything online and find at least one person who feels the same way and go, hey, I've got a friend now. Which is an easy way to make friends. It's pretty hard to make friends sometimes. What an easy way to find the person online who feels really lonely and go, I feel the same way as you do. And so, yeah, with that acceptance and lowering of stigma, we now see some of the costs that come along with that, where there are things that are being validated that we don't think are healthy.
I think, bouncing off both of your points, there is some emerging concern, and I don't think that the data is, we're not at the stage where we've done the empirical work, but there's some emerging concern anecdotally and sort of theoretically around potentially the depth of how far that validation can take people, and how that intersects with that question around diagnosis and who gets to decide. You know, you've probably heard the big headlines maybe around TikTok diagnoses and these kinds of things. And it is a legitimate concern, I think. People identifying with a label that denotes something is wrong with me. But I think to bring things back around to Ellie's point, there is still a lot more, at this stage at least, I think I'm comfortable saying there's still so much more good that comes with greater awareness of these kinds of difficulties. We should be concerned and cautious around some of the other side of the sword that Ellie's talking about, but it doesn't mean that we need to throw out all that good of having greater awareness and being more able to have these kinds of conversations.
Right. So probably a net benefit.
Net positive,
Yeah.
but we can still try to figure out ways to navigate these things that are coming up as well. Yeah.
So maybe also as part of this lowering of stigma that we think is going on, people are maybe more likely to reach out to not just social media, but healthcare providers. And because I am aware that there might be some members of the public, also like me, not a member of the psychological community, can we just make sure that we've covered, so what I said in the first case about that difference between, because I still don't think I have a good sense of this, the difference between a counsellor, a psychiatrist, and a psychologist. And so you're starting to investigate, which one do I need? What might somebody that is aware that they want to address some aspect of their well-being, what might they be able to expect from each of these different people?
I think that's a very useful question to ask, because a lot of the public are quite confused. Yeah, I would regularly get referred to as a psychiatrist by people that I've been working with for a little while, and you're like, no, is it worth having this conversation?
Get a t-shirt made.
Yeah. Yeah. So perhaps I'll start with those two, or the difference between, and then you guys can jump in on the other ones. Psychiatry is a part of the medical institution. So somebody trains, they go through general medical training, and then they specialize to become a psychiatrist, whereas a psychologist or a clinical psychologist, we come from the science of psychology, and it's been sort of turned around to, okay, so now how do we use this science to perhaps find ways to figure out how we can help people, but we don't have the background medical training. In practice, there does become quite a bit of overlap, but that's the key.
Collaborate together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, but there is in practice a fair amount of overlap. Coming at it slightly differently, I see the fundamental difference, or the fundamental skill that this is probably a contentious question to ask, but the fundamental skill that a psychologist brings, I think, is that we try to explain what is going on. We try to go beyond just labeling, and we try to say, okay, but why is that happening? How does that make sense in the context of a person's life and history, and what we know about human behavior? So, and then we work from that understand or that explanation, and try to figure out a way that might help. Yeah. Do you guys have anything you want to jump in on there?
I'm also probably biased because I am studying to be a clin psych, but I think kind of going off what Chris said, clinical psychologists do the explaining part, and then we also do the afterwards, okay, how do we cope with these behaviors, rather than my understanding of psychiatry is that they quite often jump to medication first, but that might be entirely wrong. I'm not 100% sure. They can prescribe medication. We can't as clin psychs, neither can counsellors. And that's because they have the medical training behind them. Counsellors, it's just a different pathway, really. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure either. So sorry, that might not be very helpful.
No, I think I share your point around it. Counsellor is harder to define, and I think that's partially because it is
Might miss other.
a little bit because it's less legally constrained as well as a term. It's more open. It's less. There is still some regulation, but it is less regulated, and so you get quite a lot of variety in terms of different schools of thought within counselling. Some very much are there to listen and validate and bounce back. Some do offer support. It's hard to define, but generally, for the most part, counsellors are there to be supportive, listen, and help you maybe come up with your own problems. But that might not match all counsellors because there's a huge amount of variety there as well.
For instance, like a GP would be a good starting point for somebody maybe to get advice
to
on
try to navigate where to go. Absolutely. GPs are well versed in helping people navigate the system. Yeah.
Great. Ellie, what you said about medication, thought that this might be a good segue to ask about how much do you think of well-being as like located in the body? Like what is the difference between, and then use that as a segue to go into maybe some Māori more holistic conceptions of well-being, which I know we want to talk about.
Yeah. Oh, that's really hard. The first part's hard.
The others maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like I said at the start, I think of well-being as kind of all of those facets of your lives. So I think there is a part of it that is within our bodies. But I think that there are parts that are like not tied to our bodies at all. That's all I'm really going to say about that. But I can talk about the Māori stuff. Māori, I guess the way that I view well-being is actually very consistent with Māori view of well-being or hauora. Hands up if we've heard of Te Whare Tapawha. Yeah. Mean. So yeah, you're probably listening to me speak and you're like, oh, that's sounding kind of familiar. We also have a little booklet. If you don't have one, they're at the front. There's a little activity in here, and that is derived from Te Whare Tapawha, because I feel like a lot of, personally as well, until this year, a lot of the time we get told about Te Whare Tapawha, but we don't actually know how to use it, right? You're like, okay, I understand. It's the physical side, it's the mental side, it's the relationship side, and it's my like spiritual side, whether that's religion, culture, anything like that. But how do I actually put this into practice? And that activity in there is like a really quick and easy way for you to check in with yourself about which side of my well-being am I doing really well in, and which sides am I maybe not doing so well in at the moment. And it's really quick, really easy. I think for Māori too, it's not just considering like what well-being is, it's considering what being unwell is. And actually, I don't think that's just for Māori, I think that's for everyone. Because how can we know what well-being is if we don't know what being unwell is? I feel like I'm saying well a lot.
That's not well-being. The whole
Yeah.
thing is meant to be well-being.
Sorry. But yeah, for Māori, I think a lot of it comes back to colonization, and I know that people are sick of hearing about colonization, but it actually still has such a massive impact on well-being. Yeah, it's led to people being in lower socioeconomics situations. There are lower expectations for Māori in terms of performance. There is negative media portrayal, which then leads to stereotypes. And yeah, I think it's really, really important to consider all of those parts of being unwell in order to understand what thriving. Actually, yeah. Back to the very first question of this whole panel. I think well-being is thriving, not just surviving. Yeah.
Did you steal that quote from someone?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I stole that. Don't quote me on that. It's not mine. But it's Aristotle, according to Chris.
I think that's
Quote Chris on that.
Don't quote Chris.
But yeah, I think it sums up well-being really, really nicely. And kind of, I think what you said at the start, maybe as well. Yeah, thriving rather than just getting through the day. That's my ramble.
Kia ora. Does anyone have anything to add, either on maybe that mind-body connection?
Yeah, Chris.
I mean, because I know, for instance, I learned very late in life actually that exercise helps me feel better, and it was embarrassing. I was like 26 and I was like, oh my gosh, this actually works.
Isn't it so disappointing every time? You're like, dang, it actually works.
To go for a walk and get some fresh air. But yeah, no, so how much of it do you think any of the other two, that mind versus body thing? I'm very body biased, but any thoughts on that?
I think I grabbed the mic because I firstly just wanted to explain my stupid Aristotle joke. It was partially a joke, but one, how did you phrase it?
Surviving, not thriving.
Thriving, not surviving, not just surviving. One, much more articulate than my broad waffly point at the start. But the gist of what you're saying, that goes back to, and I'm not like ancient Greek kind of scholar or anything, but I'm pretty sure it goes back to the likes of Aristotle and the concept of eudaimonia, the idea of like living, of carving out a good life.
Eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia.
I have to Google that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to Google it as well, but apparently. Look, asking me about the body is opening a can of worms. I said that my research is focused in on the concept of mental disorder, but the other kind of side of it is that I'm really interested in ideas of embodiment, that the mind is not separate from the body to begin with. And a whole bunch of related ideas, and asking the question of what does mental disorder, or this thing we call mental disorder, what does it look like when we start from that kind of assumption? Because woven through the very idea of mental disorder is that you can have disorder that is mental, that is somehow separate to physical, right? It's like they belong in, yeah, and we keep them in different books, and we have different professions that look at them and so on.
Dental being different.
Yeah, right. Why? Why? Our teeth are really fundamentally important, and not just to our physical well-being. Our teeth, to riff off your example, are hugely important to our mental health, right? You screw up your teeth, or you have anyone who's ever had tooth pain, anyone who's ever had ongoing difficulties with their teeth, how it affects your eating, how it affects your daily routine. All these things are deeply, deeply integrated to the point that questions like where is well-being, it almost like, yeah, because well-being is not some magical energy, right? It's a category that we either know we're feeling it or we're not, we're thriving or we're not. And yeah, I think it's not that it's in the body, it's something we're maybe achieving with the body or we're not. And when I say that, I'm not meaning that in any sense that the mind is separate.
Like a duet, maybe, between the mind and the body.
Yeah, like a mind-body connection thing. Actually, no, I can run with that. The best metaphor that I have heard is that if the body is the orchestra, our mind is the music. It's not separate, but it is something.
Did you steal that quote as well?
No. Oh, yes, I stole it. Sorry, I thought you were saying, did you come up with it? No, I think I might have this wrong, but I think that was Evan Thompson. He's one of my favorite authors. Most people wouldn't know who that is. Another quote in the same vein from him is that mind is not in the brain, much like flight is not in the wings of a bird.
Gee, that's poetic.
Yeah,
Write
I know.
that one down. Oh
I
my
know.
gosh.
I wish I could come up with snippets like that. But he's talking about how it's not really separate in the first place. Even talking about a mind-body connection implies that they're separate. Really, mind seems to be something that we're doing with our whole body and brain as we navigate our environments, move through relationships, and figure out how to live a good life. And I just think he puts that so well. So I thought I'd squeeze it in there following on.
Matt, do you have any whakaaro, any thoughts about either that surviving and thriving or anything related to that?
I was thinking about the connection to the body, and I really like Te Whare Tapawha as the general idea being that if you have four walls holding everything together, they all have to connect with one another, and it would be weird to say that one wall is driving the other, or one wall is where the well-being lives and the other three walls are there too. I imagined if you've gone on a first date with someone, or if you're out with someone and you're not quite sure it's a first date yet, and the first time you hold hands and you realize that you're on a date and there's like an electric shock through your body, there's no electricity there, right? There's nothing got zapped, but there's that feeling there that is your experience of yourself in your mind, in your body. Someone else is there, and the wairua, there is something I would call spiritual about that experience, because 20 years into a relationship and you hold hands with your partner, there's not really an electroshock there anymore for most people.
Speaking from personal experience.
There are like 5% of people who like still feel that. So if you're in that like 5% of people who, if they're in love with someone, the butterflies never go away, they feel that kind of in love thing, come chat to me, and because that's so cool. And it's really interesting to do research with people who are like, I'm so in love with my partner, and they've been together for 20 years. And everyone else is like, oh, get a room. I don't want to talk to you anymore.
That's kind of sorry. Yeah, but I'm very happy for those of you who, oh gosh, my partner isn't watching this. No, I'm sure not.
But yeah, the point of well-being, not just being inside your mind, being inside other people too, or inside your connection with other people, I think is entirely psychologically accurate. It captures such a nice idea in psychology right now.
Yeah, ka pai everyone. What I actually think that we are probably going to see if we can take some audience questions. I have some more questions. I have hundreds of more questions if you know we need. But I did want to make sure that the audience had an opportunity to ask their partai, their questions as well. I think, did we maybe have some microphone runners? Yeah. So if there are any questions, let's do. Maybe not yet. Oh, no, I didn't even know you were here. Kia ora.
This works. My question is just inspired by some of your comments on social media and well-being. And I've just been reading this book about virtual humans and the role of artificial intelligence, and how we may have AI mind clones that we talk to, you know, because they're fed with all this data from social media about us. And they might be able to look after us when we get old, or they could be a coach or a counselor to us as well, because often some people find it easier to talk to an AI bot than to another human being. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how do you feel that point you were making on knowing that you are well or not. How does technology come into play in telling you, not the TikTok kind of telling you but something wrong, but will it get more intelligent in being able to figure out that something's not well here?
I think there was a Black Mirror episode on that.
Yeah. I don't know, but I think like AI's in everything online at the moment. Like every single social media platform's got like that AI chat that you can ask questions to. ChatGPT is so readily available. I do remember hearing about someone in the engineering school is doing research on like AI and how people use it. And someone was talking about how they have formed like a relationship with an AI bot. So I think people can form those relationships. Whether or not that is healthy for us, I don't know. There are dangers with parasocial relationships, but humans have formed parasocial. Oh, that's jargon. A parasocial relationship is where you form a relationship with someone that you don't actually know through like film, social media, that kind of thing. So like influencers, celebrities. Yeah. And yeah, humans have, as long as celebrities have existed, humans have done those kinds of things. We form parasocial relationships. So I don't really know if that's much different with AI. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. Anyone else want to have a?
Yeah, in 2011, there was a VUW paper saying that we'll be in relationships with robots by 2050. 2 years ago was the first reported person who is in a committed relationship with a robot with an AI brain.
I think that. They just say they are.
Yeah, well, that's how we say it with everyone.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's not go down that road.
Well, that's how we trust anyone who's in a relationship. So yeah, and there's an AI app called Replica where you sign up and you have a AI romantic partner. The app currently has somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 users. So you could fill an entire Wellington full of people who are in relationships with an AI app. So to your question, that's the future. I really am curious of does that make you stressed out? If people are logging on to an AI app that's been trained with all of your past recordings, all of the things you've noted down, and is a Ellie or a Chris AI, are you comfortable with that? Is that a cool thing for them to be using?
I don't know.
Feels like a privacy problem.
Yeah.
To me, but anyway.
I don't know. It's not actually me, so I guess, but yeah, I've never thought about that. So I will continue to think.
Fair response. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear your thoughts on that, Matt, because I thought that would be the case, right? That humans build relationships. It doesn't surprise. It's not necessarily surprising that we'll build it with whatever we're given. The question for me is what underlies that AI system or whatever it is that we're interacting with, and who owns it, who benefits, who owns that data. If you're not paying for it, then you are the product. And that side of things really worries me, and also our ability to regulate these sorts of things. So our great debate in the school recently was, which is a little bit of a joking debate, but it was on the topic of is ChatGPT my next therapist? And it was surprising to me how convincing the other side, Hedwig and I were on the anti-AI side, but it was surprising to me that the valid points that others made. We don't have enough psychologists in this country, for example, to be serving need. If we can scale up with something like AI. There's a lot of potential for good, but there's also a lot of potential for harm. And it is extraordinarily hard to regulate what these chatbots are going to tell people. At the moment, my sense is that they are very good at offering stock standard advice, but it's the kind of advice that you could probably find with 5 minutes of Googling anyway, but it gives it to you straight away and it feels very truthy. What it doesn't seem to do is really show, I mean, there's some out there that are better at being a bit more relational, but sometimes they feel a bit off and they don't really uncanny valley type thing. Yeah, they don't give you, and then what they're not doing is that thing that I was trying to say that psychologists are often there to do, to really listen and build a working sense of what is going on and offering tailored guidance based on that. Most of the time they're offering stock standard advice. And one of the risks there's a lot of them, but one of them for me is that people are going to listen. They're going to go, well, this is my therapist. Well, this is, this trusted AI bot. It's telling me to try this. For example, exercise, which absolutely is one of the most robust things that we can suggest in terms of mental health. But for some people, they try to exercise and they don't feel anything. What does a person do in that case? And a lot of the time, I think they go, well, I tried the thing that this fancy AI bot told me, and they feel disheartened. And then it lowers their motivation to continue engaging with help. So a lot of potential, but a lot of risk as well. That's kind of my thoughts.
Good question.
Thank you for the presentation. I have some comment on well-being. There are people that need medication to get chemical balance in their head. We know that this is with psychiatry with doctors. To learn psychology is to look for happiness and good health. Like the way we think, the way we behave, the environment that we select, watch a movie that brings us some laughter, be happy, and to socialize with people that we enjoy each other's company. Sometimes I think we can determine our life by the way we live, the selection of lifestyle. In life, there are things that we need and we want, but sometimes we face disappointment. And that's where religion comes in. To pray, we trust that it's God's will, the prayer will be answered. But there is a transition period. The candidate might go into addictive habit like addictive eating, addictive sleeping. All these are some of mental health. And to break through can be quite difficult. So in my opinion, to live a well-balanced life, to enjoy good well-being, it's not only the person herself or himself, but also the environment, the external party. So that's where God comes in, that gives love, that gives support, and there's hope in Jesus. This is my opinion.
We haven't really talked about religion as much, so I don't know.
No. Yeah, I really appreciate the comment. Absolutely. For a lot of people, some form of faith process or having the community that religion often brings is an absolute pillar of well-being for many, many people. It's not for everyone, but I think that speaks to the point earlier and around people carve out or develop their well-being in different ways. And yeah, I really echo your point around the role of the environment and others around us in how we construct well-being for ourselves, whatever that means to us. Yeah.
So let's go back to the mind-body question, mind-body stuff that you mentioned. There's a bunch of people that, not just with acute injuries or quick illnesses, but people with deep-seated trauma that experience a bunch of bodily sensations, whether your body's psychosomatic or something else. A big portion of those people go to lots of different health professionals, such as GPs, and then they get undiagnosed, which feeds into a bunch of negative repercussions, not being validated, not having funding, or whatever it is. So the role of the psychologist in helping people grasp and grow that awareness and channel that awareness into what's going on with their psychological well-being, with their physical well-being. What do you think is the role of the psychologist to get people to increase their well-being in that space?
Any ideas?
I think the role of the psychologist is, again, this is coming from my personal thoughts about what well-being are, but I think the role of the psychologist is to uplift all of those facets of someone's well-being. Yeah, where's my thoughts gone? I think people do it in different ways as well, and part of the psychologist-client relationship is figuring out what works for each client, because it's never going to be the same, because well-being is never the same for any two people. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if I answered your question, but those are my thoughts. Chris.
I'm just trying to figure out perhaps what aspect of your question. There's a couple of thoughts. One is that I think trauma is a space where we're not doing stuff well. Trauma doesn't fit with the systems of care that we have particularly well, and I think that's what your question is highlighting. What do we mean by trauma? And is a different kind of question. But these sorts of experiences that you're talking about, where trauma affects the way that people experience their body and affects the way that they look after themselves and impacts on their physical health and these sorts of things, and the way that is perhaps being mismanaged when they try to access the health system. I think your question highlights a really key flaw in that space. For me, the role, one of the major benefits of one of the major the word is gone. No, privileges of being a psychologist is that most of the time we have a lot more time than other health professionals. And so when we're talking about something like an experience of trauma that crosses over our ways of speaking about the mind and body, and it's presenting in physical ways and it's presenting in psychological ways, and it doesn't fit, and it's a bit different for everyone. It doesn't fit the ways of speaking that a GP might be ready to receive, for example. They simply don't have the time in 15 minutes when they're stressed and they're thinking about how many patients they've got to get through and so on. They're under so much pressure. Whereas as a psychologist, one of the things that I'm most grateful for is having the time to sit and listen, hear about a person's experience, and then to collaboratively sort of craft ways for them to make sense of that in the context of their history. And I think that simple act of trying to develop a way for them to understand those experiences that seem to differ from those around them, for example, is really beneficial, because if I can understand it, it's less terrifying, less scary, and maybe then I can take a step towards figuring a way, perhaps not to resolve it, but a way around it, or to somehow find a way to live my good life, whether or not that's present. I've kind of loosely addressed bits of your question. I'm not sure if I covered all of it, sorry. Any other thoughts on?
No. If no one has any other questions, I have one. We're maybe time for one more question. So speak now or forever hold your peace. I guess I wanted to ask about that mindfulness thing that we talked about in our preparation, because before speaking with you folks, that was my primary level of interaction with the idea of well-being, and seeing ads every day for better health and like hundreds of, is it better health or better help, or there seems to be a proliferation of apps and companies essentially that are trying to feed off of that insecurity about, am I well enough, I suppose. Do you have any thoughts? Is it just, it's capitalism, it sucks, or is there something more nuanced to be taken from that?
I mean, for me, that's the gist of it.
Okay.
But absolutely, I hear your point. We see that with mindfulness. We see that with ADHD assessments, and the way that the algorithms feed us these opportunities for validation, right? And behind that screen are many companies making quite a bit of money, and it's not usually quality healthcare that you're going to be offered. Mindfulness, for example, it has huge potential as a framework of thinking that has absolutely been stolen and westernized from Eastern philosophical thought and packaged for a Western audience. And we can have some feelings about that and maybe think about that, but the way then that it is used or sold back or sold to people, is often not very true to the ways, the wider frameworks within which those ideas were developed, Buddhist ideas, for example. And often key elements of them are stripped away so that they represent things that kind of look and feel good and make us feel like we're doing something so that they can sell it to us. So I'm quite concerned about that whole space. It kind of comes back to the AI question of who's behind the model. But did anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kind of just think it's capitalism as well. And I've just heard horror stories about BetterHelp in particular. But every other podcast, every other YouTube video, they've been sponsored by them. And so they're making so much money off of people who are not getting quality help. I think there is maybe something to say for the fact that it has contributed to the destigmatization a little bit. And it's, getting some stuff out there to people and they may not have known about it before, but overall, I am not a fan. And there are definitely better ways, I think. The other thing is that there's so many of them now that when you Google something, like you're Googling for help, all that comes up is all of those things, and it's just clogging and preventing people from accessing places that are actually going to help. And so, I think that's really dangerous about them as well. Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, the idea of mindfulness, I think, is really aptly named, because if you were...
I also didn't make that up.
If you were in charge of McDonald's and someone came up to you and said, I don't think everyone wants burgers, I think we just should give burgers to the people who need burgers, you'd kind of get kicked out. There's the idea of packaging these things and is the claim that, our service is going to work for everyone. Mindfulness is a thing we should just give everyone, and if it doesn't work for someone, it's their fault. But actually, what you've been talking about so much is well-being what well-being means to you and what it means in your environment and given your history, that there is never going to be one catch-all thing that works for everyone. Even something like food, sleep, exercise are things that humans need, but they need it in the way that they need it. Exercise could be a marathon, or it could be walking to get coffee, right? And so telling someone they need to exercise or they need to do mindfulness is a way to make money and isn't a way to be responsive. I do want to pass it back to you, Ellie. We've said what not to do. How do people get help? What should people do if they go, I need help?
We need to finish on a nice positive note.
In this really nice booklet, on the back, there's some, free text, free call places. There's also, places like Te Whare Māori, Te Haika, Piki, suicide crisis helplines, things like that. They're all really good jumping points. Also, reach out to your friends in whānau. They're your friends in whānau for a reason. they care about you a lot. Particularly if you're someone who everyone will come to you, but when you're not feeling great, you won't go to anyone. I may be talking about myself. Yeah. Reach out. It's really hard. I know it's really hard, but they are there. They do care. And they can help you in finding help if you do need it. For those of you that are students at Vic, Māori Ora has the student counselling. Some of them are really amazing. The ones that I've been to have been really great. I can't vouch for them all, but the ones that I've been to have been awesome. So, and it's free, which is really cool. Yeah, Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, but you've just flagged all these positive things, and I'm still thinking. I just wanted to jump in on bet. I know, yeah. Very, very, very briefly. BetterHelp. To add on to that dog pile, they got done recently for selling the information that they had collected to advertisers. So they collected information from vulnerable people and then sold that to advertisers. So yeah, you might see them online, but I wouldn't trust them, to be honest. That's my personal opinion.
Okay, now we're positive.
Yeah, now something positive. Anyone got anything?
Oh, which thing you said before? Oh, okay.
Watch cat videos. They are, that is so cute. How can you be angry and watch a cat video or a puppy video if you're not a cat person? I understand, but I'm a cat person. Or just cute animals. Honestly, the easiest and quickest way to bring your mood back up. Yeah.
Ngā mihi nui. Please, before we end off with a karakia, and then we have plenty of kai food outside to stay on and share the moment and have more of korero together. But please join me in thanking the panel and Georgia for this amazing discussion. Those were so thoughtful and very funny as well. Not all. Yeah, thank you so much.